Teodoro Obiag Regime. Teodoro Obiag Regime, born June 5, 1942, is the President of Equatorial Guinea, having served since 1979. Early life. Born into the Asangi clan in Ikokan, Obiag joined the military during the colonial period, and attended the military academy in Zaragoza, Spain. He achieved the rank of lieutenant upon the election of Francisco Macias Ngma. Under Macias, Obiag held various jobs, including governor of Bioko, head of the Black Beach prison, and leader of the National Guard. Presidency. He deposed Francisco Macias on August 3, 1979 in a bloody coup d'état. Macias was placed on trial for his activities over the previous decade and sentenced to death. His activities had included the genocide of the Bubi. He was executed on September 29, 1979 by firing squad. Obiag declared that the new government would make a fresh start from Macias' brutal and repressive regime. He inherited a country with an empty treasury and a population that had dropped to a third of its 1968 level, with about 50 of the former 1.2 million inhabitants having moved either to Spain or to neighboring African countries, or being murdered during the dictatorship of Obiag's predecessor. A new constitution was adopted in 1982. At the same time, Obiag was elected to a 7-year term as president. He was re-elected in 1989 as the only candidate. After other parties were permitted to organize, he was re-elected in 1996 and 2002 with 98% of the vote in elections condemned as fraudulent by international observers. Again in 2009 he was elected with 97% of the vote amid accusations of fraud and intimidation. Obiag's regime retained clear authoritarian characteristics even after other parties were legalized in 1991. Although his rule was initially considered more humane than that of his uncle, by most accounts it has become more brutal over the years. Most domestic and international observers consider his regime to be one of the most corrupt, ethnocentric, oppressive and undemocratic states in the world. Equatorial Guinea is now essentially a single-party state, dominated by Obiag's Democratic Party of Equatorial Guinea (PDG). In 2008 American journalist Peter Moss called Obiag Africa's worst dictator, worse than Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. The constitution grants Obiag wide powers, including the power to rule by decree. All but one member of the 100-seat national parliament belong to the PDG or are aligned with it. The opposition is severely hampered by the lack of a free press as a vehicle for their views. All of the broadcast media are either owned outright by the government or controlled by its allies. The one nominally private radio station, for instance, is owned by Obiag's son. Abuses under Obiag have included unlawful killings by security forces, government-sanctioned kidnappings, systematic torture of prisoners and detainees by security forces, life-threatening conditions in prisons and detention facilities, impunity, arbitrary arrest, detention, and incommunicado detention. In July 2003, state-operated radio declared Obiag to be a god who is in permanent contact with the Almighty and can decide to kill without anyone calling him to account and without going to hell. He personally made similar comments in 1993. Despite these comments, he still claims that he is a devout Catholic and was invited to the Vatican by John Paul II and again by Benedict XVI. Macias had also proclaimed himself a god. Obiag has encouraged his cult of personality by ensuring that public speeches end in well-wishing for himself rather than for the Republic. Many important buildings have a presidential lodge, many towns and cities have streets commemorating Obiag's coup against Macias, as well as there being a penchant among the population to wear clothes with his face printed on them. Like his predecessor and other African dictators such as Idi Amin and Mobutu Sese Seko, Obiag has assigned to himself several creative titles. Among them are Gentleman of the Great Island of Bioko, Anoban and Rio Muni. He also refers to himself as El Jefe the Boss. In similar fashion to Idi Amin, Obiag has purportedly allowed rumors that he is a cannibal to circulate. Fictional rumors on cannibalism had been used for centuries among the Fang people of Central and West Africa to make opponents fear them, of which Obiag is a descendant. Many testimonies of former residents of Equatorial Guinea, before and during the civil unrest, indicate that cannibalism had been applied as a tool of psychological warfare. Forbes magazine has said that he is one of the wealthiest heads of state, with a net worth of $600 million. Official sources have complained that Forbes is wrongly counting state property as personal property. In 2003, Obiag told the citizenry that he felt compelled to take full control of the national treasury in order to prevent civil servants from being tempted to engage in corrupt practices. To avoid this corruption, Obiag deposited more than $500 million into accounts controlled by Obiag and his family at Riggs Bank in Washington, D.C., leading a U.S. federal court to fine the bank $16 million. Finances. Obiag had a close relationship with Washington, D.C.-based Riggs Bank. He is said to have been welcomed by top Riggs officials, who held a luncheon in his honor. Publicity regarding this relationship would later contribute to the downfall of Riggs. His son owns property through his Sweetwater Malibu LLC at 3620 Sweetwater Road, Malibu, California. This property has the highest assessed property value in Malibu. On November 10, 2010, the Supreme Court in France accepted that the complaint filed by Transparency International in France on December 2, 2008 is admissible. Court's decision will allow the appointment of an investigating judge and the opening of a judicial inquiry into claims that the president has used state funds to purchase private property in France. Reported by News Time Africa on November 22, 2010. An article published in Forbes magazine suggested Obiag has gathered roughly $700 million of the country's wealth in U.S. bank accounts. Relations with the United States. Equatorial Guinea's relations with the United States entered a cooling phase in 1993, when Ambassador John E. Bennett was accused of practicing witchcraft at the graves of 10 British airmen who were killed when their plane crashed there during World War II. Bennett departed after receiving a death threat at the U.S. Embassy in Malabo in 1994. In his farewell address, he publicly named the government's most notorious torturers, including Equatorial Guinea's current Minister of National Security, Manuel Ngumba. No new envoy was appointed, and the embassy was closed in 1996, leaving its affairs to be handled by the embassy in neighboring Cameroon. Things started to turn around after the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks on New York and Washington, in the aftermath of which the United States sought a radical reprioritization in its dealings with key African states. On January 25, 2002, the Institute for Advanced Strategic and Political Studies, a Jerusalem-based think tank, sponsored a forum on African oil, a priority for U.S. national security and African development at the University Club in Washington, D.C. According to the Institute, West African oil is what can help stabilize the Middle East, end Muslim terror, and secure a measure of energy security. First, the Africa Initiative is Africa's turn. And, turning Africa can help turn the kaleidoscope that will reset misalliances and unseat misrule driven by oil and murder. It's a policy. Speaking at the IASPS Forum, Assistant Secretary of State for Africa Walter H. Kansteiner said, "African oil is of national strategic interest to us, and it will increase and become more important as we move forward. It will be people like you who are going to develop the resource, bring that oil home, and try to develop the African countries as you do it." In a lengthy state visit from March to April 2006, President Obiag sought to reopen the closed embassy, claiming that the lack of a U.S. diplomatic presence is definitely holding back economic growth. President Obiag was warmly greeted by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who called him a good friend, and Obiag himself was extremely pleased and hopeful that this relationship will continue to grow in friendship and cooperation. The PR company of Cassidy Associates may be partially responsible for this change in the relations between Obiag and the United States government. Since 2004, Cassidy has been employed by the dictator's government at a rate of at least $120,000 a month. By October 2006, however, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee had raised concerns about the proposal to build the new embassy on land owned by Obiag himself, whom the United Nations Commission on Human Rights has accused of directly overseeing the torture of opponents of his regime. 2009 re-election. In the 2009 presidential election, Obiag ran for re-election and won a landslide victory against opposition leader Placido Abigo.